Everybody, welcome back to the fourth week of our study called Destinations. We're trying to figure out how the Apostle Paul moved in the book of Acts and how we can move in God's direction to find our place. So we've already talked about how we have to hear the cries of people around us, and we have to find places of prayer, and then we have to praise and persecution. So now here we are in the first century ruins of the agora that the Apostle Paul would have come to in the city of Thessalonica. Thessalonica to us, Niki is modern day Greek. But he comes into this place, the harbor's not too far from here, and we think archaeologically the synagogue that we're going to mention in the scriptures are just to my left a little bit. But behind me, this is the forum, this is the public place where everything was bought and sold and all the public stuff happened, where the riot and the uprising we're going to talk about here as the chapel bells go off, the uprising happening in this agora, this marketplace. Today's thought about how we find God's destination for us is this: resurrection testimony. Thessalonica is where the Apostle Paul comes, and now remember, he made his way from Philippi about 90 miles. It's about 2.5 or 3 hours on a bus. He's walking the entire way. Remember, he's got wounds, he's beat up, he's destroyed. I would be looking for a latte, sit down and do nothing. Paul goes straight to the synagogue, and that's where we're going to pick up today in Acts 17, verse 1. It says, when they had passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia, we passed through there, we saw the road signs, they came to Thessalonica where there was a Jewish synagogue. As was his custom, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and proving that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. This Jesus I'm proclaiming to you is Christ, he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks and not a few prominent women. But the Jews were jealous, so they rounded up some bad characters from the marketplace here, and they formed a mob, and they started a riot in the city. They rushed to Jason's house in search of Paul and Silas in order to bring them out to the crowd. When they did not find them, they dragged Jason and some other brothers before the city officials, shouting, "These men who have caused trouble all over the world have now come here." I just want to stop for just a moment and just consider this really cool thing. I like to try to identify brothers and sisters in Christ that are ancient brothers and sisters in Christ. There's a guy named Jason, Iason in the Greek language, who lived here and he worked here, and he was part of that 3-week revival that the Apostle Paul started, and he's the one that had to pay to get out of jail for the Apostle Paul's preaching. But I want to focus on these 3 words to start off with. It says that Paul reasoned, Paul explained, and Paul proved. These 3 words are just, the first word is dialegeto, we get the word dialogue from. He had a conversation. He started a conversation in the synagogue, and then it spilled into the marketplace. He explained, he opened up their ideas about what Jesus was about and what the Messiah was about. He proved, in other words, he placed, the word means to place beside, para, beside, tithemi, to place beside his argument. So he's in the synagogue, he's preaching hours-long sermon. God bless me for only having 10 or 12 minutes, but he's preaching hours long, days long. People are coming to faith in Jesus Christ. Everything's going well, but the Jews get mad and they form this mob. Here's what I want to focus on today, though, and this is important for us finding our destination. What is Paul reasoning, explaining, and proving? It's this one thing, the key to all of Christianity. It's the resurrection. It's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He proved and talked to them from the Scriptures, it says in verse 3, that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. When we begin to proclaim the resurrection of Jesus Christ, it's going to do one of 2 things. It's going to start a riot, or people are going to find hope in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's the keystone, it's the cornerstone for who we are in Jesus. It's the promise that we have, it's the hope that we have. Paul's not talking about theology here. He's not trying to win some debate about angels or demons or any of that kind of thing. His simple message is this: Jesus Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. And because of that resurrection, he's the Christ. Because when a man dies and then comes back to life in his own power, he's the one you want to follow. And so the Apostle Paul preaches this story of resurrection. And in fact, I believe that that's the place that you and I find the ability to find our place with God. when we talk about resurrection, when we have the hope of the resurrection. We live in a world that's dead and dying and lost. This place was filled with all kinds of idols and idolatry, a bunch of false hopes. They prayed to gods, they gave offerings to gods, they attended worship services, sacrificed to gods. These gods could not do what Jesus can do, and that's help us rise from the dead and have resurrection, experience resurrection. So the Apostle Paul, if I would say his number one card that he plays in every city is, go to the synagogue, talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And here's why. Because even still today, in our world, we live in a dead world, a dead and dying world where we place our trust in a lot of idols. Maybe not statues like the one behind me, but money and fame, success, and popularity. All those things are the things we trust in this world. And in the middle of that, we say Jesus Christ is the only one that can offer life eternal. That's why John 3:16 is the verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not die, but will live eternally. That's what the Apostle Paul is preaching 2,000 years ago, and that's what we're preaching today. And here's what I want to encourage you with. Here's your destination. It's not that you have to go into the synagogue or go into church and have a sermon, or even come into a marketplace where you work or where you go to school and say, let me tell you about Jesus. You don't have to be that bold. All you have to do is to be ready to give the reason for the hope that you have in Christ Jesus. 1 Peter 3:15 says, always be ready. I believe if we seek places of prayer and we praise in persecution, God will open the doors for us to say, here's why I hope in the resurrection. And when you share the resurrection story, you're surrounded by people who just can't wait to hear the good news that Jesus will save them and give them new life. I want to turn now, because here's the deal. The Apostle Paul would write 2 letters to the Christians that started this church. By the way, how'd this whole thing end? Well, our next time together, we're going to be in Berea, because Paul and Silas were not captured by the mob. Jason was. He was dragged in here, posted bail. They released him. Paul and Silas snuck out of town and went on to Berea. But the reality is the church here started, and when we get to Athens later in this study, Paul sends Timothy back to this church to check on them. He writes 2 letters to them, and this one letter from the first letter to the Thessalonians in chapter 4 is the famous resurrection passage, and I want to share it with you now, because this is the final word. He preached resurrection to the Thessalonians, and then he encouraged them with resurrection. In chapter 4, it says this, brothers, we don't want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep or grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, the voice of the archangel, with a trumpet call of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. And after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage each other with these words. Words written to this church 2,000 years ago, still true for us today. If people want to know what Christianity is all about, be ready to tell them this. It's my hope in the resurrection. And when you start saying that and sharing that story, you're getting closer to your destination. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.